ideas from that Delivering Alpha Summit. Joining us now is Jimmy Urido, Managing Director at TJM Institutional Services. So, Jim, I know, listen, you have a job, so you're probably not sitting there focused on the thing the whole time, but you heard some of these ideas. Was there one or two, good or bad, short, long, that really struck out to you?
Well, I hate to say what it was because I fear that people will think I'm being political, and I swear to God, this is coming from a trader who I like to think my needle starts somewhat in the middle. And when they began to talk about the different political candidates and their attitude toward business, and you talk about Elizabeth Warren. Now, you mentioned the thing about private equity. There is many people agree that there's a lot of things to be needed to be changed in private equity to make things equitable, let's say. But when she speaks, it seems like she's coming at it instead of with a razor blade to fine tune it, with a jackhammer. If your main thing is to rein in corporate excess, then for someone to make the argument that that could be really bad for the stock market is a perfectly reasonable argument. Now, we've had presidents before who want to rein in corporate excess too, and we see the Federal Reserve zero out rates to kind of counterbalance that. Will that happen again? Probably it would. But again, I underscore that it's reasonable to make an argument that that could be very bad for the corporate sector if someone wants to come in and be a cowboy and change everything.
Fair enough, but listen, I had this conversation, by the way, with oil and gas executives at a conference in Houston earlier this week, because obviously that industry, I mean, you've had calls of banning fracking, maybe banning drilling altogether, and I don't want to speak for everybody I talk to, Jim, but the general thought is that, and maybe they're being overly optimistic, was, listen, candidates of both parties, not Democrat, not Republican, both of them, they're going to say a lot, because they have to say a lot to sort of stand out from the pack and maybe get the nomination and then maybe get elected, and what actually happens may be different. And maybe that's perhaps why, with Warren jumping to perhaps at least being tied or near the top of the potential candidates, the markets have held up.
There's no doubt. And this is a funny thing that you're mentioning. I think it's a byproduct of the two-party system, because you have to be pretty far out there to grab attention, like you said. So what we're banking on is saying, oh, they're politicians, they're not really telling the truth, they're not going to fight as hard for that as they say. That's a sad commentary. I'd love to just be able to hear what people's policies are and vote on that. But yeah, to that extent, absolutely. But when you talk about the fracking thing and some of the policies that have been mentioned, and then you look at what happened in Saudi Arabia over the weekend, if we weren't the size oil producers we are now, like if something like this happened 15 years ago, that move in oil could have been twice as big as it was, perhaps even more, and could have had real, somewhat cataclysmic effects on our economy. So the fact that we're a big oil producer gives us this huge advantage over things like that. And is fracking bad? I don't know. I think it's probably not the greatest thing for the environment too. But if you don't look at the balance, you could be getting into economic trouble.
I actually spoke with a former fairly high-level member of the Obama administration, now in the private sector, and he was like, listen, we talked about how oil and gas pretty much single-handedly pulled the economy out of the depths of great recessions from 2008 to 2010. I mean, it was the only industry adding jobs, and he kind of, looked around and leaned in. He's like, listen, here's the thing. President Obama, he liked the oil and gas industry because it made the economy look better. It gave the White House maybe the only positive economic data point they had for about 2 years, Jim.
Yeah, I know. I have a daughter who's an environmental engineer, who'll be actually getting her degree. So if she's watching right now, she's going to hate that I say anything bad about, the environmental issues. But you have to realize that, oil and gas is an enormous part. And big, huge, deep recessions are terrible for the environment as well, too. So that is a big deal. And it was a big deal when fracking was pulling us out, like you said, and to have that one anchor that's keeping us moored in that Great Recession is a huge deal.
It's the reason I got involved more with the industry. I mean, it was just that it was the only economic data point that was doing well. Steve Leishman and I have talked about this. Everything else was awful, and this industry was up. People were packing up their cars, moving to North Dakota, because it was the only job they could get. I saw it with my own eyes. People literally, everything they owned was in the car because they were moving, and they were going to get a job, whatever else be damned, and they were going to do that. All right, outside of sort of the political element and